Chapter 8. The cameras have been disabled, sir, Alistair reported. Of course they have. No doubt the first thing Brody did when he entered her apartment. Yes, sir. Alistair waited patiently without fidgeting. Like certain sentries and very visible posts around the world, he was capable of standing still as a statue for a long time. Which, working for Duran, was something that came in handy more often than not. Several minutes passed. Finally, Duran said the watchers around her building pulled them back another 2 blocks. They won't be able to see the building at all, sir. Duran lifted his gaze from the papers before him, those odd green eyes of his unreadable. Do you think I'm not aware of that information, Alistair? I'm sure you are, sir. Apologies. I'll send the order to the watchers immediately. Yes, do that. Alistair slipped from the office without visible haste, but without wasting a moment, all the while reminding himself yet again that it just wasn't wise to question an order from Duran. Ever. Alone in the very nice suite on the top floor of the hotel his team had rented for the duration, Duran sat at his desk frowning in thought. It wasn't an expression he usually allowed his team to see, and most certainly not one he allowed his superiors to see. But he was alone for the moment, and for the first time in a long time, he was more than a little disturbed. He had grown accustomed to the fact that their psychics often had problems reading new psychics, especially in the early days before the resistance was broken down. But he was looking down at 2 names of new psychics one of his telepaths had been able, to a degree, to read, and both had thoughts of the same person in their minds, the same man, a man both had been convinced could help them if they could only reach him, with their minds, their abilities. Bishop. Duran wasn't at all sure they were wrong about that. It was something he had considered a possible danger for some years now, though he had hoped Bishop would be too busy with his own team and considerable dangers they faced on a daily basis to even be aware of anything else that was going on among the rest of the psychic population. He should have known better. And now he was left with the worry that Bishop knew at least something about them, about what was going on, that he was likely to make contact with at least one of those opposing them, and what? That was the problem. Duran wasn't at all sure what Bishop would do if he knew what was going on, what he could do, and whether he was powerful enough to discover a truth they had managed to hide for decades. All Duran really knew was that 2 psychics taken very recently had recent thoughts of Bishop on their minds, and no matter which way he looked at it, that was not good. Tasha was reasonably sure she had been asleep a long time because night had fallen and her bedroom was lamplit. She could hear dimly the TV in the living room, too low to bother her. She felt rested and very relaxed, very, very relaxed, and too comfortable to even stir when a lovely woman with long dark hair emerged from the shadows near the closet and settled into the chair near the foot of Tasha's bed. Hello, Tasha murmured. I need you to listen to me, Tasha, the woman said, her voice quiet and serene. It's very important. It must be, Tasha responded, her own voice soft. Because you're here. You came a long way, didn't you? Yes, and I can't stay long, so you have to listen and remember. I can help you understand. Understand? Understand them, understand what you're up against, and understand him. Okay, I'm listening. The woman nodded. I was born Elizabeth Lyon, only child of Roger and Patricia Lyon in Seattle. My parents were very wealthy and they loved me very much. But I was different. I sometimes heard things I soon learned no one else heard. Whispers in my head that told me what other people were thinking or feeling. Me too, Tasha said. I know, but I didn't learn to hide it as you did, Tasha. My parents were often baffled by me and worried that my abilities would set me apart from others all my life. Being wealthy, they explored what options were open to them and me at the time, meeting with avowed psychics and with researchers studying what was then most commonly called ESP. It was shortly after this period, just a few days before my 10th birthday, that I was kidnapped. I never saw my captors and was kept unconscious for several days, drugged so deeply that even my psychic abilities slept and told me nothing. When I awakened, I was in a hospital with both my parents leaning over my bed. I remember nothing of what had happened to me, if anything had. I had no injuries. Though I didn't know it at the time, to get me back, my parents had made a bargain with my captors. They might as well have made a bargain with the devil. For several years, my life seemed little changed, except that my parents seemed to worry more about my safety. And something else. I was visited once or twice each month by a friend of my parents, a very handsome young man named Elliot Wolf. He, too, was psychic, and he wanted to guide me, to teach me how to use my abilities. It was what my parents wanted, and I was entirely willing. Did he help you? Tasha was listening intently. Perhaps. He was the only person in my life who understood my abilities, understood what I was going through and learning to master them, and I thought I was in love with him. How old were you? When he first began visiting, I was 17. Crush, Tasha guessed. Looking back, yes, of course, though you couldn't have convinced me of that then. All I can tell you for certain is that my feelings for him blinded me all through the remainder of my teen years. But as I matured, both my instincts and my strengthening psychic abilities told me there was something wrong, something hidden from me in my life. You sensed it? I sensed something wrong, and there were snatches of conversations I overheard, discussions interrupted when I entered a room. Gradually, I came to believe that my parents and Elliot were hiding things from me. I tried more than once to focus my abilities on that suspicion, but it wasn't until just after my graduation from high school that I was able to break through the walls they had built around me. What I discovered on that horrible night was so unbelievable, so shocking, that I could only run, try to escape. What else could I do? The man I had believed I loved was a soulless monster, intended to become my mate so that we might breed and produce psychic offspring. It was what my parents had agreed to in order to save my life, the deal they had made. Murphy was not Alistair, and there was a distinct snap to her voice when she told Duran this was not part of the plan. You weren't supposed to test her so soon. Not part of my plan, he agreed. I do wonder about yours, though. She ignored that. I told you there was something different about contacting Solomon telepathically. Something unpredictable, maybe even unstable, but she has a lot of power. Uncontrolled? Not exactly. She has a lot of control, too. It's just that she isn't entirely aware of just how powerful she really is, and that's a dangerous thing. Yes. You also told me Brody wasn't psychic. He isn't. Perhaps he wasn't, but something has changed. With Tasha Solomon, at any rate. That's what Astrid says. She says the telepathic contact was unusually deep, and that Brody responded, that he helped Solomon, kept her from losing strength, and helped her escape the maze. Before she got to the center? Yes. Murphy wasn't often disconcerted. I didn't know anybody could do that. No wonder he didn't have much to say later on. I imagine he's learning to cope. She frowned. I don't like it. You shouldn't have pushed her, not like that, not this soon. John's been in this a long time, and we both know it's been driving him. If Tasha Solomon becomes more than just another wounded psychic he needs to protect, if she becomes more than that to him, he could take her and go to ground. After 10 years in this, he may be more than ready to do just that. And if he wants to disappear, wants both of them to disappear, especially to protect her, Nobody on either side is ever going to find them. You seem very sure of that. I am, unless you're holding one hell of an ace up your sleeve. Brody alone would be more dangerous than you can imagine if he chose to. If he stopped being a guardian and chose to fight, really fight, or disappear. Either way, we both know I can't afford to lose Brody or Solomon, and neither can you. Solomon's abilities are that formidable? Astrid didn't tell you? She told me there was a lot of power and that some kind of connection had been made with Brody. Murphy wondered just how much of the contact Astrid had kept to herself, and why. She also wondered if Duran was being straight with her. That was always a question mark. Solomon can do things, Duran, things she isn't even aware she can do. If you push her, if anyone pushes her too hard, she could destroy herself and anyone near her. We've both seen that happen before. He heard something in her voice. Or she could be the supreme you've been searching for, the psychic able to tip the balance in your favor. It wasn't often Duran's calm face showed expression, but he was very clearly surprised by that. Astrid didn't feel it in her. I wonder. She wouldn't have. I know how much you use and value your favorite psychic, but news for you, Astrid has her limits, just like everybody else, and her blind spots. But you were able to feel possibilities in Solomon. I got physically closer, maybe that made the difference. He frowned. You aren't connected with Brody? Are you kidding? Nobody's ever been able to connect with Brody, not like that. Read him, yes, when he allows it, but not connect to him. Unless Astrid's right and Tasha Solomon has. Brody has experience with psychics. Not like this, he doesn't. If she did connect with him, then he'll be feeling something different. And given time, he could figure out what it is. Maybe even figure a way to use it against you. But I doubt he has a clue right now. I doubt Solomon does either. I'm betting they're both overwhelmed. His wife was psychic. I know that. And I know she connected with him on a deep level, but I have no idea if that connection formed a pathway. I know, it didn't. She wondered how he knew, but didn't ask. A question for later. Well, if Solomon went that deep, we can both bet something changed in Brody, in both of them. How that change will manifest is anybody's guess, especially if some kind of a pathway was forged between them. That was Astrid's take. She's not entirely sure just how, but is certain a pathway was created. One way? She says not. Murphy's brows rose. If that's the case, we have more than one problem. Solomon's abilities, at least when I touched them, were powerful, but not being used for anything except defense. No deep emotion has ever pushed her to explore her own limits. But Brody, there is a lot of rage in him, and he's lost too much already. As calm as he usually appears, he is driven by emotion. It's at the core of everything he does. A mental or emotional pathway between him and Solomon, especially if she's as powerful as we believe she is, could supply the strong emotional drive she's never really had, his. It'll likely give her even more power and much more incentive to test her own limits. And it would mean something else as well. It would mean that all Brody's experiences in this to date will be viewed through an entirely new set of eyes. He'll have a better idea just what's at stake, and that means he is not going to let anyone he cares about be harmed or taken away again. The thought had occurred, which means you'll never bring Solomon over, whether she's strong enough to resist, or could even be safely brought over given the power she possesses, may well be a moot point, is a moot point, if she really connected with him. Brody won't let it happen. Duran said, I don't give up easily, Murphy. Neither does Brody. In fact, he doesn't give up at all. That isn't in him to give up. Not when he really cares. He's stronger than you, Duran. You think so? Duran seemed mildly curious. I know so. He was before he met Solomon. And now, if he can tap her abilities in any way, if he's connected to her, well, we both know that's an edge you just don't have. Perhaps, Duran said. We'll see, won't we? Tasha felt deeply disturbed, and on a skin-crawling level she had never felt before. They sold you? They planned to just hand you over to breed more psychics? They didn't understand. Elizabeth Lyon's voice was quiet. And they didn't understand the worst of what they had done. They had also pledged themselves to aiding the ruthless, secretive organization Elliot belonged to, even though they knew their help would result in the death or destruction of other psychics. That's horrible. Yes, I couldn't hate them for choosing to save my life, whatever the cost, but I could no longer love them for it. I chose to begin a new life alone that very night. I had a little money left to me by my grandmother, enough to get by if I was careful. And I had learned a few things by watching my father get what he wanted. I knew how to find resources. It was a simple matter to get forged identification and a new name. I became Elizabeth Storm. It seemed apt. And you disappeared? As far as my family and Elliot knew, yes. I gained admission to a small college in the Midwest, and there my new life settled into a kind of peace. I had a part-time job and made new friends. I was never quite able to stop looking over my shoulder, and I had to guard myself every minute in order not to reveal my abilities. But I knew that I was as safe as I could possibly be. At least I thought so. But you weren't. It wasn't a guess. No, I began to feel watched. But before I could really focus on that and try to determine if it was really true, at the beginning of my senior year in college, I met John Brody. Tasha blinked. Oh, Brody is the him you mentioned. One of the reasons why I need to know all this. Yes. It feels he should tell me himself, shouldn't he? He won't, not at least for a long time. And you need to know this now, but you mustn't tell him you know, at least not yet. When? You'll know when the time is right. Tasha was still reluctant, but nodded slowly. Elizabeth went on with her story. John was amazing. He was a law student, brilliant, handsome, and stronger than any man I had ever known. He won my heart so quickly it was almost terrifying. And it was the same way with him, I knew that. We had a connection, a bond, from the very first time we touched, and it only grew stronger as the days passed. A psychic bond? For some reason, Tasha really wanted to know that. No, we never connected in that way, but I had to be honest with him, at least as honest as I could be given the facts, so I told him 2 of the secrets of my life, that I was a psychic and that I had broken with my family and changed my name. He loved me and asked no questions beyond what I was willing to talk about. I loved him, but I had lived with the secrets for so long that it was difficult to confide in, even trust, just because I loved. That must have been tough, Tasha said. Yes, but we both thought we had plenty of time for confidences, for secrets. John wanted me to tell him only what I was ready to tell him. You didn't tell him about Elliot? No, not about Elliot, and not about his organization, not about what they had planned for me. It all sounded so unbelievable. And even though I knew John loved me, I didn't think he would believe me. That's what I told myself, at least, though I know now that at least part of my reluctance was a bone-deep certainty that the knowledge would put him in danger. It probably would have, Tasha tried to console, even knowing she couldn't, knowing it was too late for that. Maybe. Anyway, I was able to put it out of my mind. There was just so much else to think about. We married just after I graduated college. I got a job teaching while John finished law school. It was a good life, a happy life. She drew a breath. I can pinpoint the day things began to change. The day I made another choice I was to bitterly regret. Tasha didn't ask, just waited silently. Seemed a simple thing at first. Another psychic recognized me as a kindred spirit, something psychics can often do. She asked me for help, pleaded, really. She was young, frightened. She hardly understood her abilities or knew what to do with them, and was having trouble hiding them. I had to help her. Of course you did. That was how it began. They came to me quietly, one or two at a time, asking for my help. Surprising number of them as the months went by. That seemed odd, but I didn't question it at the time. They needed help, and I had learned a lot in my life about my abilities. There was no place else for them to go. No one else they could turn to who understood what they were going through. As a cover, I formed a study group, and we met 2 or 3 times a week after regular classes. John patiently accepted my absences and secretiveness. I don't think he understood, not completely, but he loved me and respected my need to be independent. That's what he thought was going on. From things he said now and then, I think so. And he was busy too. Oh, very. We didn't have a lot of time together, but we made it count. Those are some of my best memories. But then something else happened, Tasha guessed. Yes. I had made many good and lasting friends through my study group. One in particular, a girl in her first year of college, became an especially good friend. And she was an unusually powerful psychic with great potential. It was out of concern for her that I told her what had happened to me, the fate that had been planned for me, something I had never told anyone else, not even John. How did she react? She was shocked, frightened, and I felt sure just a bit disbelieving, because it all sounded so incredible. I couldn't blame her for that. Someone was breeding psychics? What kind of sense did that make? What kind of reasoning could be behind it? But I had told her, and there was no taking that information back. So I swore her to secrecy, and life went on. I suppose it was inevitable that as our secretive circle grew wider and wider, it would come to include someone connected to the vast organization to which Elliot belonged. But when the betrayal came, it was so sudden and unexpected that it caught me completely off guard. Tasha was almost afraid to ask, what happened? 2 people dropped suddenly out of our group and vanished. One of them was someone I had been feeling uneasy about for reasons I couldn't even explain to myself. The other was the girl in whom I had confided my story. A few days passed, and I became more and more concerned, and then I was supposed to meet John for lunch that day. He was late, which wasn't unusual, so I waited. It was at a sidewalk cafe in Boston, one of our favorite spots. I was enjoying the fall day, the cool breeze, fretting about my missing friends, but kids drop out of college all the time, so I couldn't assume they hadn't done just that. And then Elliot suddenly sat down across the table. Bishop leaned back in his chair, staring grimly at the laptop open on the desk before him. God damn it, he said quietly. Miranda had seen her husband's computer skills many times, but both the speed and complexity of his work over the last couple of hours had impressed her, and momentarily pushed aside the question of what had disturbed him. Tell me you didn't just hack into the Department of Defense, she said. Into the DOD, she said. He turned his head and looked at her, a faint smile lightening his expression. The Department of Defense has some of the best and strongest firewalls in the entire cyber world. Sensible, given the sort of information they routinely handle. Noah. No, I didn't just hack into the DOD, he paused, adding, I have clearance, actually, but that wasn't where I was. It looked like it. Supposed to. A number of the psychics I've kept in touch with over the years wanted a safe and secure way to contact me if they had to. If they were in trouble or otherwise needed my help. It would have been easy enough to create a private email account a lot more secure than the average person feels the need for, but you wanted real security. Bishop nodded. So I piggybacked onto the DOD in a sense, created a safe and very, very secure area inside those firewalls, undetectable by the DOD system, where each of them could leave me messages. None of them could communicate with each other, just me. Individual passwords, codes, all they needed to get through the firewalls and make contact with me without alerting anyone else. And I set it up so that if one of them did leave me a message, the program would send an innocent email alert to my FBI account. What sort of alert? A note supposedly from a friend in law enforcement here in the South. Very innocent, nothing to send up flags. Except to you. Yeah, I can't always be close to the laptop all the time, but of course I check that account several times every day and have the laptop set up to alert me with a tone if that note lands in my inbox even when I'm not online, or if it's the middle of the night. Miranda shook her head. I thought you just plugged in your laptop in the bedroom every night to recharge it, even with our connection. I had no idea what was really going on. It's an automatic thing now, isn't it? Something you don't think about. I suppose it's something I set up a couple of years before I found you again, when I was actively searching for psychics for the unit, and for you. I have to say, it's not entirely a bad thing to find out we still have our secrets even with the connection. Is it? He eyed her, trying to tell me something. Miranda smiled. A little mystery is good for a relationship, that's all. Uh-huh. He gazed at her a moment longer, then yanked his mind back to far more deadly mysteries. Anyway, there have been no notes from Katie Swan or Henry McCord. So his client was right in believing Henry has disappeared too? Looks that way. And if the client has his days straight, Henry must have been taken about a week ago. They do move fast, Miranda said, sobered. Henry last week, Katie this week, and there were 2 other psychics you were concerned about around the end of last year. 2 more disappearances. Grace Seymour and Jeffrey Bell, clairvoyant and seer respectively. With Jeffrey, all the evidence pointed to him just up and moving, running away. He'd done it before, and the same thing was happening to him again. He tried to disappear into the woodwork to do his job and live quietly, but somebody got curious, looked into his background, and the whole circus started for him again. He couldn't escape the desperate people begging him for whatever it was they needed to know. So it looked like he packed up and left. Yeah, Grace Seymour, on the other hand, was a more troubling case, at least at the time. She's a born psychic, not triggered like Jeffrey by some kind of trauma. Her abilities had been getting stronger and her control was erratic, but she was handling it, mostly. Her second husband, apparently, couldn't. The divorce was barely final when she disappeared. A concerned coworker came to check on her and found everything as it should have been in her house. Nothing disturbed, nothing missing, except Grace. Her car was in the garage, keys in the house, cell phone showing no suspicious calls, house phone the same. He frowned again. What? Miranda asked. The only odd thing, at least to me, was that her disappearance looked planned, but not obviously, if that makes any sense. She'd just gotten a nice inheritance from her grandmother's estate and used some of that to pay off her house. All of her utility bills were auto pays, and there was plenty in the bank account to cover those debits even for a year or more. Her cleaning service showed up every week to take care of the house. They'd been paid in advance for 6 months of weekly cleanings. The police didn't find that suspicious. It wasn't unusual for her, according to the service. She'd been paying them ahead for the last couple of years. Her bank statements confirmed it. Friends said she didn't like dealing with bills and finances, so had streamlined as much as possible. It made sense given what her friends and neighbors and coworkers said about her. There was absolutely nothing to make the police suspicious, except that she was gone. Bishop nodded. I never even found the hint of a trail to follow. Her ex had moved out of the country more than 2 weeks before she disappeared, had a cast-iron alibi for those weeks. No family to speak of, and a couple of distant cousins we finally located hadn't heard from her in years. She was just gone. Then we got busy on the first of several difficult cases, and before I knew it, my list of missing psychics was getting much too long to ignore. What happened with Grace's house? Nothing. Her estate is large enough that she has both an attorney and a financial advisor, both honest, and they're just continuing on with the last instructions they were given. The attorney hired a property manager to look after her place, and the financial advisor is taking care of investments, conservative, and banking proceeds as instructed. They both act as if she's coming back, and as far as the law is concerned, she could be, at least for the next 7 years, until she can be declared legally dead. Exactly. If Henry disappeared from a job he was working on, Miranda said, and Grace disappeared from home, then we need to visit both places. Yeah, and both are in or near Charleston. That's convenient. Very, Bishop said.